All right. Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale the Real Seeker, and we're continuing on with my panel review shows with my one panelist here, Shroud skeptic Hugh Farey. Hey, Hugh, how's it going?
Hi there. Fine, thanks.
Awesome to have you here. It's just you and me. I think this is the first time it's you've been on a show where it is just you and I.
I think that's probably true. And it's also the first time when we've more or less been on a show where we probably agree with each other.
Exactly. Yes. See, this is the brilliance. So today we're going to be covering a couple of sunlight-based ordinary artistic mechanisms. So Nicholas Allen's Proto-Photo hypothesis, and also one that's not covered a lot, but Nathan Wilson's shadow hypothesis. And interestingly, Nathan was a student of Dr. Gary Habermas. So now he's come out as a Shroud skeptic there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to going over this because, hey, even though Hugh is a Shroud skeptic, when it comes to these two mechanisms, he's actually on the pro-Shroud side. We're going to be on the same team here. So, that's going to be a great discussion here. A first, I think, on my show here. So, but yeah, Hugh, over to you. Just how have you been? What have you been up to in terms of your research lately?
I'm not sure I've been pursuing Shroud things recently. I'm not sure whether you know I'm an actor, among other things, and I've been busy acting recently, which has occupied a lot of my time. So yes, I haven't. Well, we did analyze a person who I would have liked to have supported and was looking forward to supporting, but who made so many mistakes in the first few minutes of their podcast that it wasn't worth supporting in the end. I can't even remember his name. But do you remember? And we both wrote various things on his website suggesting that he was wrong. An Egyptian historian.
I'm not sure. I don't remember. Egyptian.
Yeah, who's well thought of in the Egyptological world, but not so much in the biblical world.
Oh, David Falk.
Yes, yeah.
Yep, exactly. Oh yeah, sorry, I blanked on that. Yeah, so David Falk did his video, and I did kind of a response video where I was quoting once again. Hugh was on the same side as the pro-Shroud side, right? Because it's about truth. We have to have great arguments. So, all right, so yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into this show here. So let's start off with the Proto-Photo hypothesis. And Hugh, first of all, I'll just say hello to Ringo Cat. Welcome. He's in the live chat there. But yeah, so I just want to go over to you. So obviously, one thing to announce is I invited people on, such as Nicholas Allen, as well as Nathan Wilson and the scientist he worked with. And I even invited on, I got so desperate, I even invited on Prince and Picknett, who also go for the Proto-Photo, but they all declined to be on. But with Nicholas Allen, he did provide me his book, which he gave me permission to post on my blog for free for this show. So if you want to see the positive Proto-Photo side, Nicholas Allen has generously let me post up his book for free. So you read him in his own words. But with that said, I'm here with Hugh. So Hugh, I want to turn it to you. Can you describe what is the Proto-Photo hypothesis, and what is that technique entail?
I think essentially what we need to see is that in theory, photography could have been invented a great deal earlier than we think it was. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that. It's just that there's absolutely no evidence for it. We do know that even the Romans used lenses, I think possibly beginning with just accidental blobs of glass, but then slowly refining them, even as spectacles. And certainly the early Middle Ages, spectacles were quite common. So lenses were certainly available if you needed to focus light onto a particular spot. And also the large version of the pinhole camera, the camera obscura, had been known for a very long time, perhaps from about 1150 or so onwards, if not before then. I can't remember the exact historical origins of it. But you can imagine then that light could be, and probably was, focused onto a what we might call a retina or a back screen of some kind.
Mhm.
And the problem, which we don't know whether anybody, yeah, that'll do. We don't know whether anybody actually thought about this or not. The problem is how to fix the image that you've got. Getting the image is not a problem. It's holding it there once you've got it. And there are various different ways of doing it, of which all the proto-photographer people have come up with a slightly different plan. The main problem with all these theories is that it was such a momentous discovery from the moment people started to be able to fix the image that everybody publicized it. Everybody was working on it like mad. It was common knowledge that there were good photos and bad photos. It was such an exciting thing to happen. So the idea that somebody could have invented this and then there was absolutely no further investigation into it for another 500 years or so, that's what I find particularly far-fetched. That sort of deals with all the photographic ideas in one go. Each individual one, like this particular one, which I think is Nicholas Allen's, is that?
Yep.
Has other things going that are wrong with it. So has Nathan Wilson's. So have the Picknett and Prince versions. But the general objection to them all is that it's inconceivable to me that this is some kind of technology, any kind of photographic technology, which was never heard of again.
Okay. In terms of the Proto-Photo thing, so I mean, I and you both mentioned there are different proponents with slight differences. So there's Nicholas Allen, by far is probably the best and most famous proponent, but there's also Clive Prince and Lynn Picknett as well. So do you want to just kind of highlight what are some of the minor differences between the different proponents there?
We'll notice, I can see on your diagram, Nicholas Allen mentions cloth coated with light sensitive silver salts acting as film, which for one reason or another can be fixed. I think down at the bottom there, we've got a bucket of ammonia to help fix the image afterwards. Now, there's some objection to this, especially by Barry, but who knows very well that there is minimal silver on the shroud. Now, silver's a very high atomic mass element and should have been detected by various studies that have been carried out on the image. And a vanishingly small amount of silver has been discovered round about the area of the burns, which is not that surprising because we think that the silver casket melted and fell through. But there's absolutely no suggestion, I think, and even medievalists like myself don't think that there's sufficient silver anywhere else on the shroud to be associated with the image. Now, I think Picknett and Prince, Lynn Picknett, Clive Prince, I think, if I get their Christian names the right way around, I would hate to get them confused. Now, they didn't go for silver salts at all. Right. They went, as far as I recall, for potassium dichromate or something like that. And their idea is that the sensitized potassium dichromate also affected the cellulose of the shroud, so that if you then washed off all the potassium dichromate, you'd still have an image left behind. Now, when I very first joined the British Society for the Turin Shroud, I carried out an experiment on exactly that chemistry. And I'll try and look it up. And demonstrated that it could occur, that you could produce an image using potassium dichromate, and then after washing it all off, you could still have the image left on the shroud.
And just so you know, Nicholas Allen, in his kind of refutation, he says that they also used ammonium bichromate solution. as well.
Was it ammonium bichromate? Have I got my potassium and my ammonium muddled
I
up?
think so.
Anyway, the essential point is that you don't need silver. Now, I think Barry, when you ask him, he tends to emphasize the fact you can't have a photograph without silver.
Yep.
But it's simply not true. There are dozens of ways of producing photographs without silver, and perhaps the simplest way, and this is where I think Nathan Wilson's plan was to simply shine a light over a shadowed picture, and where the shadows were, the light wouldn't affect the substrate, and where the shadows weren't, the light would affect the substrate. And that can apply to a piece of newspaper.
And I'm saving the shadow hypothesis, just so you know, I'm saving the shadow hypothesis for later, just to,
So we don't need silver is the essential point. And I think that's really the main difference between the Picknett and Prince and the Nathan Wilson hypothesis.
So it's the solution they use to put on the cloth to make it sensitive to light, photosensitive to light, basically. That's the main. Now, there is another major difference just before we get into evaluating the proto-photo theory scientifically, which you've already started. There's a major historical difference between Nicholas Allen and Prince and Picknett, whereas Prince and Picknett, they make this historical claim that, hey, the Shroud of Turin, it was made by Leonardo da Vinci in the 15th or maybe even early 16th century. And the Shroud Man, that's a picture of Leonardo da Vinci. It's not Jesus, it's da Vinci. So do you want to just, this kind of historical claim, do you want to take a minute or some time to kind of, what is your take on that?
To examine it? I think perhaps the most important thing, and it's very important that authenticists don't drop themselves right in it. It's very popular, very popular. You'll have seen dozens and dozens of videos and podcasts for authenticists to say Leonardo da Vinci wasn't born until 100 years after we know the shroud existed. Therefore, Picknett and Prince were idiots. And that is said over and over again, clearly by people who have never read Picknett and Prince's book. Okay. And people who have read it and who do think that they have some, who think that there's truth in what they say, naturally reject all the authenticist argument as being utterly absurd. The authenticists know nothing of what they speak if that is their reason for rejecting the Leonardo da Vinci argument.
Fair enough. I'll fess up that I was one of those. I didn't call them an idiot, but I did see it as ridiculous for that reason. So, okay, great. Defend them. That's awesome.
This is their book. Now, I don't want to tout it as the best thing in the world because I disagree with what they say. But they are well aware of the early history of the shroud. They have examined it in considerable detail. So they know that there was a shroud around in the 1350s, and they know very well when Leonardo da Vinci lived. Their point is that the early shroud either disintegrated or faded away or wasn't very satisfactory, and so Leonardo da Vinci created a copy of it. Now, he'd have done that round about 1500, say. So that would be before the Chambéry fire, but well after the shroud had left Leary. For one reason or another, perhaps when the Savoy family took over the, shall we say, the rag that Marguerite de Charny had been touting around, and they thought this is not appropriate to the dignity of our family, we'll have it reproduced. And then they got hold of Leonardo da Vinci, and Leonardo da Vinci reproduced it. Of course, then they know, and again, they're not stupid, they've done their research, that this runs up against the carbon-14 dating, which plants the shroud back in the 14th century. On the other hand, there was plenty of old material about. There still is. And so they surmise that Da Vinci got hold of an old piece of cloth, which might have been hanging around. And indeed, quite probably was. It not necessarily, I may say, Israeli cloth. The idea that the cloth had to have come from Jerusalem is not very important. But there were certainly masses of old Roman cloth lying around in Italy, and indeed there still is. I mean, now it's all in museums, but no doubt it was in private collections at the time. So perhaps, according to them, Leonardo da Vinci got an old cloth and practiced with his early photographic techniques and came up with the thing that they had, and that's the basis of their argument. And in principle, apart from the fact that I wonder how much large amount of 13th century linen was in fact around in Italy at the time for him to practice on. That's speculation on their part and not very well evidenced. But also, there was nothing that Leonardo da Vinci did that was terribly secret. I mean, we've seen all his notebooks about helicopters and tanks and things like that. Now, perhaps they didn't come to much at the time because they were impractical and didn't work. But if he discovered a photographic technique which did work, I can't believe for a moment that it would have remained a secret until for as long as it did. Absolutely. And that I think is the main problem that I find against it. There's nothing technologically implausible about their reconstruction, and we might say that there's nothing historically implausible because there is a distinct gap, we may say, between the shroud leaving Léry and arriving in Chambéry. It's full of little bits and pieces. We see it going to Belgium, we see it going here and there, but it's possible that it was completely remade. But there's absolutely no evidence for it. So I think those two things are. It's not the technology that makes me think that they're incorrect. It's the two factors that A, there's no evidence for any manipulation happening, historical evidence, and B, there's no. It's incredible to me that such technology, had it been worked out, wasn't then tried by everybody all over the place.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely going to want to come back to that because, believe it or not, again, Nicholas Allen was kind enough to send me his paper where he directly addresses the Leonardo da Vinci thing, and he kind of agrees with your reasoning against it. He also does say that the technology just wasn't there in terms of the glass lens that they needed and also the solution. But so even Nicholas Allen, who is a Proto-Photo proponent, he agrees with what you're saying there, Hugh, against Prince and Picknett's techniques, specifically their version, and even goes on to say that scientifically they didn't have that technology at the time. So okay,
we don't know that they had the technology. All the bits were there, the chemicals were there, the cloth was there, the lens was there, the pinhole camera was there, but we have no evidence that anybody put it all together to produce a photograph.
Okay. So hold on one second. I'll just share his the little expert. Here's what Nicholas Allen says. So this is his concluding remark. It is safe to assume that the Shroud of Léry-Chambéry-Turin could not have been produced by means of the albumin and ammonium biochromate solution before 1798. Was not made as a result of a glass lens placed 30 centimeters from the subject, which is what Prince and Picknett say, and then was not made by Leonardo da Vinci. Again, that's a historical thing, but he does seem to be saying, even Nicholas Allen seems to be pointing to a couple of scientific issues. Do you know what he would be talking about 1798 as being
his cutoff date was probably that? Was that when the first fixed photo is that Louis Daguerre or someone like that actually producing a fixed photo?
I think it's regarding the solution that they use to make the cloth photo, the ammonium bichromate. For some reason, that solution couldn't have existed before 1798.
Well, that I disagree. I don't know about. I mixed potassium dichromate. I just found my own article, and I'm going to. Can I read this bit to you, because it's about 10 lines long, but this is my own laboratory report. I made a solution of 10 grams of potassium dichromate in 10 centiliters of water, and mixed 100 centiliters of the solution with 30 centiliters of egg white.
Okay.
The mixture turned from orange to yellow very quickly as it was stirred up. After spreading 10 centiliters of the mixture onto the square of cloth and rubbing it thoroughly on both sides, it was hung up to dry. It was then put in a cupboard, and a black and white negative was shone at it through a slide projector at a range of about 60 centimeters for 2 hours. So I wasn't fiddling about with the sun and a pinhole camera. I was just shining a photo onto it. The cloth turned burnt brownish in color, and the positive image was clearly visible. Picknett and Prince claim that the light made the egg white / dichromate mixture insoluble, so the cloth was then thoroughly rinsed in cold water. The whole image got fainter, but the paler, unexposed bits got paler still, perhaps as a result of the mixture dissolving away. The cloth was then dried, ironed, and then boiled in water, and the image virtually disappeared, and such colour as remained was a very pale grey-green. Since then, no further treatment was given to it, although it recovered its brownish tinge. The remaining image was indistinct, very close to. It was only on one side of the threads, and in this respect, it bears comparison with the quality of the markings on the shroud. So using that chemical, it's possible to make a photographic image because I've done it. I even sent a photograph of my thing to the then editor of the newsletter, who I think was Ian Wilson, who published my letter, but he didn't publish the picture because it was too indistinct. I'm just trying to find in Picknett's book the chemistry of it, but if you'd like to carry on talking in the meanwhile.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so I think, okay, so that's, and you also mentioned in terms of the solution, since we're talking about that, turning to Nicholas Allen's, obviously Barry Schwartz is raised in his great paper and stuff kind of refuting this, that the issue that Stirp investigated this and they didn't find any quantities of silver and that sort of thing, silver nitrate or silver sulfide. And this is what Nicholas Allen says is necessary to make the cloth photosensitive. Do you know, at one point he even says that in his later speculations that it would have been soaked in this silver solution, and we should
probably. Yeah.
So do you think the lack of silver is a way to falsify on a balance of probabilities Nicholas Allen's hypothesis there? Oh, are you frozen? Oh no, he was frozen.
I came back. Yes, I suddenly.
Oh, I can hear you.
I stopped being visible, but I seem to have come back again.
Okay, perfect. So I don't know if you heard me. I was just asking, do you think that the lack of silver, especially in the images where it would have had to be fixed for us to see it, is that a way to falsify Nicholas Allen's version of the Proto-Photo hypothesis on a balance of probabilities?
No, they didn't use any silver. The whole silver thing is a massive red herring. You don't need silver salts. They're not the only photosensitive salts that exist. Chromate salts will also do, and I'm just trying to find them.
But for Nicholas Allen, he specifies those. So I'm saying, do you think?
I see. Yes. Well, no, quite. If you do specify silver salts, and you think that the silver salts are producing the image, then the lack of silver on the shroud is a bit of a problem.
Okay.
Did Nicholas Allen respond to that when you asked him?
I didn't ask him about that, but I know he does address it in his book and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but yeah, I think that obviously his main thing would be kind of like, well, it's obviously all off. It was all washed off and stuff like that with the urine. That's what he says, right? But I think the main counter response to saying, well, it's all washed off, it would still have to be detectable in the
Yeah,
images in order for them to
well,
be visible and stuff. There should be.
oh yes, yeah. Well, if the image is actually made of silver salts, then washing it off would have been no good at all. If, however, the image or the formation of the image had also damaged the cellulose, then technically you could rub off all the chemicals that were actually used to produce the image, leaving just the damaged cellulose behind. And I suspect that's probably Nicholas Allen's hypothesis.
Okay.
And I have to say that I've got a little sympathy with that, except that I think I agree with you that there would still be some silver left behind. I mean, as you know, I think that there's some mileage in the iron oxide hypothesis, but that there's not enough iron oxide on the shroud now to be responsible for the image. So I sort of follow along the chemistry side, is that you started with something which produced the image, and whatever that was stained the underlying cellulose, so that even after you washed the whole thing thoroughly, you still had an image made of degraded cellulose left behind. Does that make perfect sense?
Yeah, no, I get what you're trying to say there and stuff.
Yeah.
So another thing just on the technique, the other thing that you did mention, well, did you find the quote from Picknett and Prince that you were looking for first, or?
Not exactly. I mean, I'm working on here, but I have found one thing. It goes like this. And funnily enough, by another Shroud skeptic, which I think is quite well, not a Shroud skeptic, but a somebody who thought that Jesus was alive when he was buried. The British Society for the Turin Shroud chairman Rodney Hoare, who thought that the shroud was authentic, but that it showed that Jesus was alive and not dead.
Okay.
And his justification for that was the forensic scientists at Leicestershire University, I think, in his book. Anyway, he says this. This is Picknett and Prince's book. In an early attempt to debunk our theory, BSTS chairman Rodney Hoare, who used to teach photography, objected that it was impossible for the shroud image to be a photograph, as it was inconceivable that Leonardo could have discovered the effect of light on silver salts. In our view, this is incorrect on two counts. Firstly, silver salts are not the only light-sensitive materials. And secondly, the action of silver salts was quite definitely known before Leonardo's time. There is an enigmatic reference in Pliny the Elder's natural history, and we're talking 1st century AD there, which was written in the 1st century. Yes, that it has been taken to reveal his knowledge of the darkening of silver chloride on exposure to light. So people did know about silver salts, even though they didn't necessarily use silver, or at least that Leonardo da Vinci, according to Picknett and Prince, did not necessarily use it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So in that sense, Nicholas Allen is correct in thinking that the use of silver is not anachronistic. It's possible. It's just that there isn't any silver, and that's a real problem.
Okay, so the other thing on the technique is about the lenses, because that one of the criticisms of the Proto-Photo, whether it's of Nicholas Allen or of Prince and Picknett, is that look, the lens that they would have had to have used just didn't exist in the medieval period, and so they will say it did. The techniques themselves to make the lenses that are required to do this didn't even exist until the 1550s or later. So, for example, they say the optical quality quartz lenses are made by heating quartz to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, but furnaces were not able to reach the high temperatures needed to achieve these lenses until the Industrial Revolution. Secondly, the quartz would have to be clear and very large in order to craft a lens with the specific dimensions that are needed for this technique to work. And that's, quartz crystals of this size were extremely rare, and the most abundant supply of them were in the Western Hemisphere, which obviously weren't accessible to people living in the 1350s or the 1300s. And then thirdly, the artist would then have to precisely curve and mold by hand the quartz into a lens in the shape of a convex curve without any imperfections, because the slightest error would prevent the high resolution images that are observed on the shroud. So these are kind of the three things regarding the lens that make it very implausible. What's your take on that criticism?
I get this slightly when discussing evolution. As you know, I'm a biologist in my I guess in my spare time. Was a full-time biology teacher, and one of the arguments against the hypothesis of evolution, which I have to say I totally endorse. I don't endorse the hypothesis against it. I endorse evolution as a scientific fact. But those who argue against it often say, how is it possible that one morning a fish gave birth to a lizard?
Mm-hmm.
As if there were no intermediate stages. Now, if you look at Nicholas Allen's photograph, it's an extremely good photograph. It's a high precision, a high resolution picture of a person. You can see lots of things about him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the shroud, it's extremely blurred. Now, as I say, the Romans were using glasses to see things better. Now, they weren't high precision quartz, multiple technically ground optical lenses, and they weren't even, I dare say, they weren't very clear to look through, but they were better than nothing. Sure. And if you, and as again, Nicholas Allen decided, I don't know if he explored both versions of it, but of course he used a pinhole camera, which doesn't require a lens at all. You don't use a lens. You don't need to focus light unless it's coming through a large hole. If it's only coming through a tiny hole, then any individual light ray can only go in one direction. The point about the large hole is that the light can scatter and blur all over the plate that it lands on. Mm-hmm. So if you combined a small lens in a small hole, then it wouldn't necessarily need to be particularly accurate to produce the kind of blur that most of the shroud image is. I mean, I think you could probably produce a good copy of everything except perhaps the face and the fingers by using a rounded pebble of glass. Very easily. I mean, the Romans had plenty of glass. So I think people are looking for too much optical quality, or pretending that too much optical quality was required. And even the face is people go on and on about it being high resolution. It's appalling. You know, look at me now. My image as I appear on the screen, which if you're looking at me through a mobile phone or something like that, is a very few pixels, is nevertheless in much greater definition than anything that you see on the shroud. So no, I think pretending that you need a very high quality, a high optical quality lens in order to produce any kind of photograph is a mistake.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I just want to clarify that the Pro-Shroud argument, though, it is a little bit more nuanced. From my understanding, they're arguing that, look, sure, maybe with Roman lenses you can get some kind of image, but it's the argument is in order for it to be sufficient to get what we see with the resolution of the shroud images, which brings up that second issue. That's another issue, that the body images, in terms of the high resolution, they're actually less they're less good. They're less highly resolved
Yeah.
relative to what Nicholas Allen actually got. And that's actually one of the things that rules out his method is the images are too good. Let me see if I can actually find
he used a very good lens. Now, if he'd painted his lens with, I don't know, scrubbed it with a bit of sandpaper and then painted it white, he might have got an image which was much more like the Shroud.
Gotcha. Okay, hang on one second. I'm just so people see what we're talking about. So here's the Shroud of Turin on the right, and here's Nicholas Allen's results. Again, full credit to Nicholas Allen. He's the one who did this and took these pictures, so he gets full credit and stuff. But yeah, so these are too good. These are even more highly resolved than what we have with the Shroud of Turin. So,
exactly.
but yeah. And then Hughes. So I think with the lens question here, the issue is that the Pro-Shroud side is saying in order for it to be sufficient for what we have with the Shroud, where the fingers are there and are distinguishable, you would need a lens to be used that didn't have flaws in it. Wasn't, it had to be better than what the Romans had with their dull things. Does that make sense in terms of what I think the argument is?
I think they're wrong. And I think that Picknett and Prince actually demonstrate them as being wrong. They're using a camera obscura here. Can you see they use fairly standard stuff. We've got the little model devil. And on the left-hand side, right-hand side, you can see their image of it just through a pinhole camera. So they're not using a lens at all there. Now, any kind of lens would improve that image, even if it was fairly crude. So, I think it's all very well. People love to say what would happen, but unless they've actually tried it out and found what would happen, I think some of it can be wishful thinking.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so I want to go to some of the other minimal relevant features regarding, the body images and bloodstains and stuff like that. So I just want to play a little 10-minute clip from a previous show. So Barry Schwartz, I'm going to be linking to he's written an entire paper refuting Nicholas Allen's Proto-Photo. So I just want to play his kind of, this is from his master's class, share sound. All right. And then we can discuss some of these things as to why I think it's a failure.
Yeah, there are a couple of other important technical things. Yeah.
Yep. Is that showing up? Are you seeing the screen?
I can see the skeptic's theories.
Okay.
Beautiful painting. I wonder who said that. I think I know. Yeah.
All right. Wait, that was last episode, but can you hear it as well?
Maybe my favorite.
Can you hear it?
It's not. I heard maybe my favorite, and then it stopped.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just play it.
Because this is really right up my alley. The Shroud image is a medieval photograph, possibly produced by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, but before I start this, let me first give great credit to Professor Nicholas Allen. Professor Allen took the initiative to create a camera obscura to do an experiment to demonstrate his theory. He hung a statue outside of the camera obscura, and so I give him great credit because unlike so many of these others who postulate ideas like Joe Nickel never actually made a scorched image, Nicholas Allen made a photographic image and did it superbly based on the techniques that he used. So I want to start by giving him credit for that. But let's talk first about what the camera obscura is for those who might not know. Basically, it's a dark room, and in that dark room, you'll see there's a small hole at the opposite end of the room, and there is a statue that's outside that room, out in the sunlight. According to Nicholas Allen, it took 4 days to expose his film, if you will. That film is on a piece of cloth that he had soaked in a silver salt solution, because silver is light sensitive. That's what we used in photographic film and X-ray film. And so he created an image. The only problem I have with it right off the top of my head is that hanging a body for 4 days in the sunlight, you're not going to get the same result that you get on the shroud, because it may start looking like a body at the beginning of those 4 days, but at the end of those 4 days, not so much. So, but I give him great credit. And Alan claimed that in the case of the shroud, the sheet was coated with a light-sensitive photographic emulsion, primarily made of silver salt, and he used human urine to fix the image. Okay, uric acid can function as a fixer in the photographic process. To his credit, Nicholas Allen used this technique to produce a beautiful photographic image using a camera obscura and a life-size sculpture. This is his photograph, which he gave me permission to use in about 1998, I think. Picknett and Prince, two British authors, not only agreed with Allen, but further suggested that this technique was in fact employed by Leonardo da Vinci to create the shroud. So they took Allen's theory and sort of went beyond that. Now, Nicholas Allen, the one thing he didn't do is he never made a side-by-side comparison of his camera obscura results with the image on the shroud. No reasonable conclusion can be drawn without just such a comparison. For example, Allen's photograph shows a strong directionality of light from above. There's a shadow under the chin, under the cheekbones, under the chest, under the hands. His knee and his feet are overexposed. His left arm is overexposed. So that's what you would get with a long exposure photographic image with a light source coming from above. You would get those shadows. Look at the shroud, however. There's no directionality of light evident on the shroud at all. In no direction of light. Now, the STIRP data proved, and Ray Rogers wouldn't let me use that word very often, I have to admit, but the STIRP data proved that the image on the shroud was darkest as a point where the body and cloth came in direct physical contact, and at the tip of the nose, top of the hands. The image grew more faint as the distance between cloth and body increased. And this result cannot be accomplished or duplicated using any photographic artistic mechanism that requires some form of direct interaction between the cloth and the body. That's the only way you can do this. Now, here's an example. The cloth was lifted away from the torso. I mentioned this earlier, by the hands crossed over the torso. This lifted the cloth away from the torso itself. And if you'll look closely, you'll see that images made by light would not have this property. And you can see a kind of a halo surrounding the hands where there's more faint, the image around the hands is more faint of the torso. And lighter halo. And here, let me circle it. Within that circle, the background or torso of the body is much more faint than other areas of the torso where the contact was either more direct or closer. And again, you can see that here. Let me see if I can take that out of there. So you can kind of see that dark area around the hands. That's where the torso was further away and created a more faint image and darker on the light, dark, reverse negative view. Allen's result also shows a very distinct and sharp edge around the entire image, which one would expect from a properly focused photograph. And he did a good job in that respect. But the shroud image has no distinct edges. The image at the periphery just fades away as the distance between the cloth and the body grew greater. The image grows more faint until it just disappears. There are no hard edges anywhere on the shroud's image. Allen makes no attempt to explain the blood and how it got on the cloth. So give the man credit. He did something that Ray Rogers and Al Adler, who used to yell at me, do an experiment, would be very pleased with. He did an experiment, and he just didn't go all the way to make the comparison that I've made to show that, although he did a great job, he did not match the properties of the Shroud of Turin. So what I think, and here I'm going to talk about it, I guess, no light-sensitive photographic emulsion or any associated silver salts were found anywhere on the shroud. And we had highly sensitive spectral and chemical analysis. Our pyrolysis mass spec could, I believe, detect 1 part per billion with a B. Allen claims that the silver salts were removed completely when he fixed the image. However, the fixer in the photographic process only removes the unused silver not necessary to create the image. What silver remains on the image is what's responsible for the image. If it were all removed, there would be no image as well. The image would be gone. If the shroud were made photographically, we would have found silver everywhere on that cloth, and even more so in the image areas. Now look, Nicholas said that in at least one of his later attempts, that he actually took the cloth and soaked it in a silver solution, liquid silver solution. Well, that means it would have penetrated via capillarity through the entire cloth. And we'd have found silver everywhere. We didn't find any silver except for one microscopic little bead, tiny little bead of silver that may have come from the reliquary from the 1532 fire. We can't say that for sure, but that's the most plausible answer for that. And I just told you all that, so we can move on. By the way, not one example of a photographic image exists prior to the documented invention of photography in approximately 1826. And that photograph still exists. There it is. That was by Joseph Nicephore Niepce. I believe he was either French or Italian, I'm not sure. But that's the first photographic negative attributed. And of course, I got this from Wikipedia, so you can see the link there. And here is the peer-reviewed journaled article, again from Applied Optics, the UV reflectance and fluorescent spectra of the Shroud of Turin. I also had Kevin Moran, may he rest in peace, apply, he had a VP8 image analyzer, and so we asked him to take a Nicholas Allen photo and put it in the VP8 and see what kind of results we got. We did not get the natural relief of the human face like we see on the right there. The mouth is sunken, the chin is raised, the hair is raised, the chest is elevated. Compare that to the relatively undistorted nature of the shroud's facial features. That's what makes it significant, that the VP8 revealed the natural relief of a human form. No other photograph to date that we've tested that way does so. The shroud does. And that, to me, as an imaging guy, tells me there had to be some correlation between the body and the cloth when the image formed. It's not a painting, scorch, or a medieval photograph. So, there, and here's the paper on the three-dimensional characteristics again. Now, let's talk about Leonardo da Vinci. He was born on April 15th, 1452. The first documented public exhibition of the Shroud of Turin occurred in 1355, almost 100 years before Leonardo was born. He was a great artist, but he wasn't that good. So, you know, and look, this is a self-portrait. So, and look, Leonardo was so good at documenting everything, we even know the color of the shoelaces of his assistant. And if he had created something like the Shroud of Turin, he wouldn't have kept it a secret. He was a smart man and knew how to promote himself and did very well for himself, even in his own time. And that is what we know for sure.
Okay, so that's Barry's kind of take, and I know we've already addressed the stop sharing, we've already addressed the Da Vinci stuff. Let's get rid of that. But scientifically, in terms of some of these features, you know, the negativity, the three-dimensionality, body image uniformity. So I know that's something that you dispute as a proven fact. But surely on the uniformity, the Nicholas Allen image is so evidently not uniform, even more so than the Shroud. Yeah. Well, first of all, what's your take? Let me not put words in your mouth. What's your take on some of the things Barry was talking about? You're muted, just so you know.
Oh yes, you missed all my going. Ooh, yes, Barry makes a number of interesting points. The first question I would ask him was to look at that first photograph that he shows, which we still have by, yes, Nicephore Niepce, that amazing, rather blurred photograph of rooftops or something like that. And ask what its chemical construction was.
Okay.
Will it surprise you to know that absolutely no silver was involved in it at all? That's the photo.
Mm-hmm.
No silver. he used bitumen and lavender oil. And that's all. Tar is photosensitive. And that's how he managed to make that particular chemical. I did find the bit in Picknett and Prince saying that they used, it was then that ploughing through an early 20th century dictionary of photography, we came across a process, or rather a series of processes that had been used in the early days of photography, but had long since been superseded by more convenient methods. These used a property of certain chemicals which, when mixed with an organic substance, would react to light in such a way as to make the organic parts insoluble in water. The sensitizing chemicals most often employed are chromium salts, chiefly potassium bichromate or ammonium bichromate. Many common substances were used as the organic component. So that's where I got my potassium bichromate idea from.
Okay.
Don't worry too much about the date of Leonardo da Vinci. That's not Picknett and Prince's point. That's not a sensible way of debunking them. However, the really important thing which Barry says, and which I agree with totally, is that if you are making any kind of photograph in the conventional sense, then you not only have to capture the light onto a back of some kind, but you have to shine the light in the first place. It must come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now, nowadays, it's quite possible and not difficult, but it's obvious that Nicholas Allen didn't use it. I think he used the sun, which comes from a particular place, and it might take a while to cross the sky, but in general, it was above his dangling statue. And so, as Barry says, you can see highlights on the top of the head, the upper parts of the forearms, and certainly a bit of the knees and the feet at the bottom are very brightly shone. And we can see dark shadows under the beard, perhaps, yes, if you like, in the well of the diaphragm, and underneath the hands. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we don't see in the shroud, quite the reverse in some ways, although we do see the knees are slightly darker. However, we have to watch out as to how objective we're being here, because some people have seen these shadows. The light, there was a lady called Teresa Newman, I think, who wrote a whole book called Follow the Light. And she's a sculptor, and she appears to have sculpted a figure of the shroud based on the light source that was responsible for producing the image. And she too thinks that the light came from, as we might say, in front of the shroud and above the head, say 45 degrees shining down onto whatever the image was. Now, she thinks it's authentic, and that the light somehow was heavenly created from inside the tomb to shine down on the prone body of Jesus and thus produced the image. Nicolas Lavoie, the surgeon of whom we have spoken earlier, and who thinks that the image was created by the body being vertical, he too speaks of a light source from above and in front of, can't see my hand, can you? Yes, above and in front of the body shining down. Now, I don't think that there is evidence of that. And I think Barry is correct in his little picture of the shroud draped over a body. Mm-hmm. I don't think the image is actually a photographic negative at all, and neither does Barry. He thinks it must be related to emanation from the body in more or less a vertical line, so going straight up.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is an objection to the both the Picknett and Prince and the Nicholas Allen hypothesis, but it's not necessarily overwhelming. I mean, there are lots of pictures which do produce quite a good 3D effect, because the light is evenly shone on all sides of the object that it's shining on. In particular, of course, a statue that's white. And in a recent thing that I've shown, technically speaking, if you've got a statue which is completely white, it ought to be completely invisible, or at least all the features on it completely invisible, because they're all the same color. The only way you can see any features on a statue which is painted uniformly white is because of the shadows cast by the light, which must come from a source in order to cast shadows.
And I think that Nicholas Allen or something, he mentions that it had to be white in order to reflect the light properly. Any, like black, for example, would be the opposite. It would absorb the sunlight.
Yeah, well, his main problem was that he was using sunlight. As I say, in order for me to produce any image at all, and it was very faint, I had to use a slide projector, which was focusing a small negative slide onto a small area of cloth quite powerfully. Now, he hung it for 4 days, bless him. And yes, as Barry said, that the idea of that happening on a whim and having been, was it successful or unsuccessful? Well, we can't be sure. But that was a long and complicated experiment to carry out. And you'd have thought if it worked, they'd have done it again.
Yeah.
Unless they decided it was a complete failure, and but somebody snapped it up and said, "No, all right, it's good enough." So yeah, that's the Barry idea.
Okay.
But you see, again, the fact that it has a distinct image around the image, the distinct and very sharp edge around the entire image, was presumably because he was using a very small pinhole. And to produce a sharp image, you need the smallest possible pinhole or a good lens. Now, if you've got quite a large pinhole with a very bad lens in it, then I think you're more likely to produce something that looks just like the Shroud. And of course, Picknett and Prince also recognized that some features, especially the face, were rather too well. There was slightly more resolution to the face than there is to the rest of the picture. And so they surmised that Leonardo put that on separately, which was why he used his own face, or it was a photograph of him or a bust of him or something like that. Much of their argument, not much of it, some of their argument rests on the fact that if you match a picture of, I don't know, a self-portrait of Leonardo on one side against the Shroud on the other side, they appear to have their noses, eyes and mouths match perfectly. But that, in fact, happens with dozens and dozens of pictures. I've done it with Princess Catherine of Wales and various other people. And there's nothing particularly special about the proportions of the eyes, nose and mouth that you can't match against just about everybody. So the fact that it matches Leonardo da Vinci, or indeed the fact that it matches Dürer's picture of called The Light, Albrecht Dürer's picture of the light of the world, doesn't to me prove that it was made by Albrecht Dürer, and it doesn't prove to me that it was made by Leonardo da Vinci either.
Okay, awesome.
Or that it was based on Princess Catherine of Wales from that point of view.
Okay.
Which it also matches precisely. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So thanks for your take. Just to recap. So I think in terms of negativity, again, barring your issues, but just what we mean by the photo negativity, this method gets a check mark. Obviously, that's what we're seeing. And
well, that's what it is. It's photographic negative. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And also uniformity, you seem to be admitting, well, Nicholas Allen fails here, but the only reason is because he's using the sun, and that obviously he has the top-down directionality. But if we don't postulate that, it was made in a medieval artist's or artisan's studio, and there was a unnatural light at about 45-degree angle behind the head, you said, or something, or
above, in front of and above.
In front of and above. Yeah, then we wouldn't have these issues of bright spots and dark dark
That's-
areas.
Well,
So-
that light source produces those things. So in order to do away with that, what nowadays you would, I don't know, you'd use some kind of ring flash so that you had lights all the way around the camera, and they would all flash at the same time, so that you'd get pretty well even lighting all over the subject.
Okay. And do you think that would? Okay. Well, you dispute the.
I don't think that was likely at the time because it wasn't considered particularly important.
Okay. Okay. So
Anything like
that's a historically unlikely scenario then. But
Yeah.
just scientifically speaking, if they had done it, it would have achieved body image uniformity as the shroud goes.
I think
in
so.
your
I
opinion.
think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And you also mentioned the image diffuseness. This fails, but if circumstances were different, the pinhole was larger and that sort of thing, it could have reproduced the image diffuseness. So that's a check mark in your.
Yeah. So generally speaking, it's easier to make something worse.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And now here's the one that you agree is a total failure: the vertically collimated or the vertically wrapped mapping distortions. This method, I think you said, just inherently fails to reproduce that feature. Am I correct on that front in terms of the vertical?
Yeah, in my opinion, it does. Although I have to say, that, as I said, that there is a certain subjectivity to that, in that neither not these people who we've been discussing, but also quite eminent shroud authenticists also think that there was a light source doing exactly what we see there.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
Lavoie especially produces several photographs of an elderly gentleman lying flat and standing up and with the light shining on him in different angles, showing that if he was standing up and the light was shining from him from above and in front, it would produce a shroud-like image. And he's a sensible person. So, you know, as I say, there's a certain amount of subjectivity to deciding that.
Okay, perfect. So there are only three features that I think you didn't cover that I want to get your take on, and then we can move on to the shadow hypothesis. But so the first thing, let me just bring up the image. Barry brings up the VP8, the three-dimensionality. I said this is an utter failure. What's your take? Do you think that the Proto-Photo method can give a topographical info?
Yeah, it's not too bad, but you can see there very, very, very well the light shining down shone on the top part of the breast, therefore making it more prominent, which is why it appears more prominent there. Also shone more prominently on the beard, which is why you see the beard sticking forward there. Shone, I have to say, on the nose, making the nose rather better than it is on the shroud. Look at those two noses. The Nicholas Allen's nose is better than the shroud nose. In that it comes out, I mean, it starts less depressed and it comes out more depressed, as indeed real noses do. And then, of course, he had light on the top of the hair, which is why you've got that rather prominent ridge over the top of the face. So that sort of thing could have been removed if he'd lit it in a different way.
Okay. So you think that it would get a check mark, again, depending if it was lit properly. But again, that supposition is historically implausible. No one in the medieval ages would have lighted it in the way necessary to get these.
Because it presupposes that you were trying to get this three-dimensional image, which I don't think anybody was.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the other major issue that I don't have a photo of, but that Barry raises and that I use is the issue of superficiality, right? I mean, this thing, depending on the photo, whatever the sensitizing solution was, let's say it wasn't silver, it was whatever Prince said. Wouldn't reproduce the three levels of body image superficiality at the fiber, thread. Maybe at the fabric level it would have, maybe, but not on the thread and fiber levels, right?
Well, I think it probably would, yes. Using Picknett and Prince's, I don't know if they look at the back of their image. But, of course, what they did is to completely remove all their light sensitive stuff, and so all that was left was the the image of degraded cellulose. And when I did my experiments, that you could see absolutely, it was very faint on the surface and absolutely nothing on the back. So I think the superficiality worked in that respect. Now, I don't know what Nicholas Allen did. He also soaked his cloth. I mean, I soaked my cloth until it was rigid. You could hold it. I mean, it wasn't very big. It was about 10 centimeters square, and you could hold it up like a postcard.
Okay.
But when it was completely washed, rinsed, and everything was washed away, it was as floppy as it was before, and the image was barely visible on the surface.
And did you study it microscopically to see if only the top 2 to 3 fibrils were colored, and on the fibril level of only the primary cell wall was colored? Or
I've got no reason to suppose that the anything more than the primary cell wall should be colored, because why should it have gone anywhere else? You know, I think the idea that things seep into plants is biologically unsound. I mean, it rather suggests that people don't know what plants look like or behave like. So you're unlikely to get anything seeping into the fibrils. But no, at the time I didn't have a microscope good enough to be able to tease the fibrils apart to see how far into each thread the image went. I'm not sure that my piece of cloth was sufficiently tightly woven to be able to be diagnostic anyway.
Mm-hmm. But in theory, you do think it would get a check mark if the cloth was was like the shroud of Turin.
I think it's possible. I think it's possible. Yeah.
Possible. Okay. And last but not least, so I know this is a fact you took issue with, but in terms of the blood stains, right? So when we start adding in blood stains, let me just ask you in general, how do you think that proto-photo methods would do in terms of explaining the formation of the blood stains and its properties?
Not at all. That's absolutely right. There's no question of the fact that the blood is not photographic in any sense whatever. It doesn't appear sensible from a negative point of view. It doesn't appear sensible from a 3D point of view. It's just red pigment or a red coloration. It might actually be blood, or it might be blood reinforced with vermilion or whatever. But it is blood, and it's stuck on the shroud. This photographic hypothesis doesn't explain or have anything to do with the blood. I expect if Nicholas Allen did it, he'd have just put some red paint or some blood on it afterwards.
Gotcha. So he just thinks the bloodstains were the traditional painting hypothesis.
Yeah.
Now, I know you deny this feature, but just for the sake of the audience, and then we'll move on. But that feature where there's no body images underneath the bloodstains. Do you think that this would be a problematic feature? Kind of lining up because one thing here is two things, right? So in order to get these images, it's not just a one process, right? So he had to do the face separately. He obviously has to do the frontal image and then the dorsal images separately and line all of these up, and then presumably put on the bloodstains at that point. Or if you think he put the bloodstains on the cloth first and then he set up the process, how did he line all of these things up to fit?
I personally, I don't have faith in the idea that there is no image under the bloodstains. I don't think it's well argued by Heller and Adler. They're only looking at individual threads. They talk about the threads of the image being more or less corroded than threads that are not of the image, a feature which nobody else has managed to see, which Eugenia Nietowski, Sister Damien, specifically denied. She said she never saw any of this corrosion at all. So it's how that was based. I wish we had more photographic evidence so that we could check on that. But I don't think the evidence that there is no image under the blood is sufficiently attested to be an objection to my idea that the blood was put on afterwards.
Okay, but there's still, let's pretend you're right. Let's say there are body images underneath the bloodstains for the sake of argument. I think there's still this issue of lining it up, because you have to form the frontal image separately, form the facial image separately with this proto-photo method, form the dorsal image separately, but somehow they're all aligned, perfectly aligned, as though that it would look like when it's a one single body wrapped in a shroud naturally, and then somehow these images are formed. And then also you have to bring in the blood stains and make them look in realistic spots too. So do you think?
Yeah, well, I suppose Nicholas Allen, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but if it was me, remember it took 4 days for this image to appear. So if after 1 day, when he could barely see it, he put all the bloodstains on then the rest of the image could then go on top. How about that?
Okay.
I think if I was Nicholas Allen, that's what I might suggest.
Okay. And how about aligning the dorsal and frontal image and the facial image on the bodies? Do you think that would be difficult to do if you're...
No, I don't think that's not really a problem. I don't see why it should be. I mean, you just fold the cloth round a bit more and keep it in exactly the same place, keep the body in exactly the same place. By now, rotting away. Mind you, he used a polystyrene one or something. So perhaps if he was looking to a medieval person doing it, they could have used a plaster statue or something like that.
Okay. All right, cool. So
why you would think it would be an actual body. But the point is that the image taking such a long time to form, you could start when it was very faint, then paint your blood on, and then put the rest of the image on if you wanted.
Okay. All right, cool. So that basically covers it for the proto-photos. So I want to move on to the other main hypothesis. And this is something I've only covered once in my Shroud solo shows. So this will be the first time I have an expert talk about it, but it's Nathan Wilson, that infamous student of Gary Habermas, and his shadow hypothesis, which interestingly is the exact opposite of the proto-photo, because in the proto-photo, it's the sunlight that is creating the images. In this case, it's almost like it's the shadow, the lack of the sunlight that's creating the images. But yeah, Hugh, I over to you to just first describe what is this process? What is the shadow?
And it's a brilliant idea, and I have done it myself, and it works. Only I haven't done it using a glass on cloth. I've done it using glass on grass. At one point, having nothing better to do, I wanted sports day at my school to have a big image of the school logo in the middle of the field. So after it had been mown, I then covered the field with a plastic cloth on which was painted the school logo in black. And after 2 days, took the cloth off, and sure enough, there was the image in yellow on the grass. And I thought, well, that's jolly good. So it's certainly possible to do that, and you don't necessarily need need any clever equipment. As I say, I used a plastic sheet rather than a piece of glass, but glass would have been fine. Now, but the problem is that, of course, the reason the grass went yellow was because the sun wasn't shining on it, and so it had died. Whereas what we want is for the image to go black or to stay dark while the area around it goes white. Now, you've got a lovely picture in the middle there. Now, that seems to me to suggest that the shroud, the whole cloth, I should say, was dark in some way. And it may be, I haven't read Nathan Wilson's structure of how he did this for some time, so I can't remember that the whole shroud was dark, so that the sun shining on it bleached it.
Correct. Yeah. Now
there's some discussion as to what happens when you shine light on linen. Obviously, we perhaps are familiar with the fact that bleaching linen by laying it out all over the fields was a very common feature of the Middle Ages. And so not bleaching it, but covering it with something could also have had an interesting effect. One would have to look at the chemistry of bleached and unbleached flax fibers to find out what the difference was, and then compare those to the fibers that you find on the shroud in order to check whether this method was likely or not. However, it seems to me that it's a fantastically simple and fantastically easy thing to do. And that having been the case, if I'd invented it, I'd be doing it all the time with all sorts of things. I'd paint a picture of the king and I'd produce a photograph of the king on a piece of cloth. You know, I'd be doing all sorts of interesting things like that. Wouldn't you? And the fact that it's only happened once is, in my opinion, the biggest argument against it not happening at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I totally agree and stuff. In terms of the method, there is that initial implausibility, which you seem to say is a question requiring further experimentation. But
well, for example, if we just take Alan Adler and indeed his fellow conservationists much later on, the main worry today is that the shroud is not getting lighter; it's getting darker.
Exactly.
It has been bleached and it's getting darker, rather than that it wasn't bleached and it could get lighter.
Exactly. And this is the whole basis of John Jackson and Paulo de Lazaro, right? That the images are darker because of the ultraviolet radiation. And so sunlight is seeming to make it darker and stuff. Whereas this guy's saying, no. It was initially it was darkened. And then they put this painted glass or this painted image over top. And that blocked out the sun. The painted image blocked out the sun, creating a shadow, keeping it that way. And then the sunlight shone on the rest of the cloth, lightening it, making it more whiter or bleaching it, so that the images were different. And
well, I mean, I can quite see if I was a medieval linen maker and I laid out my linen all over a field and a bit of it just happened to be under a tree, and I came back a week later to collect my bleached linen, I'd have seen the shadow of the tree on the linen. And I'd have said, my goodness, look at that. Now, if I was trying to make some sheets for the king, I'd be really pissed off. I'd think, oh, I wish I hadn't stuck it that far under the tree. I hoped it wouldn't matter. But if you were a scientist, you'd have gone, my God, you could make a picture doing that. So it's a very easily intuitive possibility that you start with unbleached linen and bleach it using light. However, as I say, first of all, we don't think that actually we think the shroud actually was bleached and is slowly unbleaching itself and getting darker rather than lighter.
Yeah.
And also, if I discovered that, the whole world would know about it in a few years. I'd be doing dozens of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So outside of those kind of initial plausibility aspects that kind of falsify this, and first of all, if you want to read it's shadowshroud.com, and
that's right. Yeah.
He's got all of his images and hypotheses. So he did a series of 3 experiments. The ones we were looking at were from number 1, but they get a little bit more diffuse when he puts them out for less time and stuff. But I just want to ask you before I get into other stuff. So in terms of the scientific evaluation of the minimal relevant features, so obviously in terms of negativity, it fulfills that. We're looking at the negative images and that sort of thing. Am I still sharing? Yeah. Okay. So, body image uniformity then, to whatever degree you agree that the body images are uniform on the shroud. Do you think that this method would also explain body image uniformity aspect?
Yeah, because it's exactly the same front, back, top and bottom. It would be there's no reason why either side should be different.
Okay. And now in terms of 3-dimensionality, hang on, let me go back to the slides. So it looks like it's just very horrible. But what's your take on the 3-dimensionality? Do you think it could?
Of the shadow image, I think the 3-dimensionality of the shadow image is very good. I think you could do a lot better than that. I mean, trying increasing the z-axis slightly and smoothing it better, and I think you'd find that that's pretty good, actually.
So you think Nathan just didn't know how to use the VP8? I guess, is that like, why does it?
Well, I don't know. I'd have to have a go on his machine, but his I've got his photo here, and
stop sharing. If you're sharing, hold on.
That's right.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've got on a different computer, so I can't share it. But I think that's probably able to be produced better. I'd have to switch it. I'd have to take a screenshot, put it into ImageJ, and jiggle it around a bit. But I think you'd probably get quite a good 3D image out of that.
Okay.
Again, because it was painted in order to have that characteristic.
So let me ask you this then. Here's my
Nathan's image is better than Nicholas Allen's from that point of view. Wilson, yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I'm just going based on his photos of his work, and it doesn't look better. But if you're saying, well, it's just he didn't know what he was doing, I could fix it up. Fair enough. But let me ask you this. Let me ask you this theoretical objection then. Because obviously the three-dimensionality in this case is coming from the painted, hang on one second, I'll just share my screen again. It's coming from that painted glass. So essentially we're talking about, where is it? From this painted glass, we're talking about the traditional painting hypothesis again. And the ability of an artist to paint the topographical information with a paintbrush and stuff, we've proven scientifically they can't do that. And even for certified forensic artists attempted to do that with the traditional paintbrush and methods, and they couldn't reproduce the shroud's topographical information.
That confuses me, to be honest.
Okay.
The images that they are reported to have produced, which are in, I think, one of John Jackson's papers, they're not very good. And you could do better than that yourself. If you were given a similar sort of image, especially if you were told which bits were the brightest and which bits were the darkest. I mean, the thing is, they're not just not very good in terms of light and dark. They're not very good in terms of shape. One of them has a beard which looks exactly like the Shroud beard and is nothing at all like the beard of the bas relief they were told to copy, as if he was actually not copying very much from that, but was interpreting it in the light of the shroud itself. More or less circular, and some of them have got a very narrow and angular shaped face. And you think, well, I could have done better than that. So I'm not sure what the circumstances were in which these highly qualified artists were drawing, quite honestly.
Okay. If that's, oh, sorry.
Have you? Can you see that? Have you got those? Hang
on.
There it is. There. It's in one of John Jackson's papers. I'll bring it up.
Yep. You can share your screen. I've stopped sharing, so you can share if you want.
Well, I may look a bit.
Well, one thing while you're looking that up, the thing that I would respond to that, if your counter is, well, they were kind of fudging it on purpose to make them purposefully bad. So
I don't think they were. I find it very confusing.
Okay, yeah, they were just okay. Well, that seems implied, but as
you know, I don't believe that people were fudging it or confusing it. I think everybody was doing the best they could. But they're just not very good.
Okay, because they even had anchor points. But if it is very easy, whether they were actually trying or not, to do way better than this, that there is that point that, well, yeah, but look, throughout all of art history, nobody has done better. Like, why has no other painting passed the VP8 image analyzer test in the way the Shroud has? Like, why haven't you?
Well, obviously, because the Shroud wasn't a painting. It wasn't produced in that way for doing that particular thing.
But it would, in this method, if the shadow hypothesis is true, it was, only it was put on glass or something else, would, I think, would even make
Oh well, no, that's a serious objection to Nathan Wilson's. Nathan Wilson's hypothesis is that you have to paint the shroud fairly well in order to get it to do that, and I suspect I think that's quite difficult. I think if he'd managed to do it, I don't know, supposing he'd got a bas relief and a very thin piece of silk or something like that, stained his silk and then laid his stained silk on a piece of white cloth, something along those lines, he might have got it. Right now, can I share my screen?
Yep.
I know this gets really complicated. Is it present?
Present, yep. And then click on share screen. Then go to an entire screen and click the image in the middle so that it has a blue border.
Window. Oh, anyway, here we go. That's what I want to share. Click share.
All right. There
we
go.
Lovely. Okay. So this is just one of the, well, I can probably slide it about. Now, up on the A is the bas relief, or I think it's more of a bas relief or some kind of statue, that artist A was asked to copy. And if I look at artist A, can you see my cursor wriggling around the lips of artist A? Well, I won't go further because it goes back, but the beard, look at the shape of the beard here compared to the shape of the beard here, and then no relation. And it's as if, I mean, and the bas relief is, as I say, more or less circular, and that's quite different. And I just wonder how he managed to copy it in that way, because the two things don't look to me as if one is a copy of the other. It's a very nice picture of a face, but it's not a very good picture of the face above. I mean, look at the shape of the lower lip, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That just doesn't seem to me to be a very good one. Now, down here, we've got artist B. And again, we've got no beard at all. Now, maybe here the artist was thinking that the sides of the face completely disappeared, in which case he's not doing too badly there, I think. He's made the tip of the nose a bit more whiter and less distinct from the bridge of the nose, which is why it comes out in a point just here. But then the shroud has some slightly dodgy aspects about the nose to it as well. And here is artist C. And again, it doesn't seem to me to be a very good imitation of exactly what we saw above. And we're back to them again. That one's not too bad.
Yeah.
He's got the beard a bit better now. This is that's artist B. Yeah, artist A doesn't seem to recognize what the beard was like. Artist B is at least trying to copy the image that we see.
Yeah, it looks like some of them are trying to. They've got the shroud obviously in mind, like especially that first guy.
I mean, if you compare any of them to that image that we see there labeled A, they're just not very good copies of it. And that's what makes me want to know more about how it happened and what happened, so that we can find out what was going on.
The point, and one thing I would say, that obviously the point with this is more about the three-dimensionality, and they were given those anchor points to use in order to reproduce.
This one is not in. This isn't too bad. In fact, it's probably better than the shroud. The nose is more prominent. The lips are more distinctive. The eyebrows and the bottom of the eyes more distinctive. You might say it doesn't look anything like the shroud. Well, no, because the shroud's got a great big splodge of hair all around it, which this doesn't have. And it may be that that artist realized that this hair is a good deal further back than the cheek, and therefore, although it appears white in the photograph, wouldn't appear at all on a body cloth distance relationship. And that's why he's missed it out completely.
Yeah, so I haven't.
It doesn't look anything like the shroud, but the image doesn't look anything like the shroud.
So I just disagree. Like, I'm looking at it. This is nothing compared to this is horrible. Like, do you have the VP8 of the Shroud image above in the paper or somewhere else available? Because that looks nothing like the Shroud's quality at all.
No, but that's a picture of the Shroud. Now, if you remove take all this off, because it shouldn't be there, as it were. Yeah. You see, the hair could only be there if it was right forward. And in the model that the artist was looking at, he was saying to himself, the hair is well receded, and therefore it wouldn't appear on the cloth as I was told to do it.
Okay, I see what you're saying now without the hair. Okay,
yeah, this hair can only be bright if it's well forward of where it ought to be.
Okay, so I'm just picturing it without the hair. It does. Okay, can you go down?
So here we've got, all we can see here is the eyebrows. We've got some balls for the eyes, which we can't really see. And then you've got the nose with all its bumps and things on it.
I can clearly see the mustache and then the lips right there.
The mustache and the lower lip. You can just see one lower lip. So as we go down,
I saw both lips, but okay.
So here we can see two lips and the mustache. Now,
even without the hair, this is horrible. Like, the nose is messed up. It's like a pig nose up to the left.
You can see that here, the white bit that he's left here, it should perhaps fade into this darker bit here better than it has done. But apart from that, I think we could do something with these three. Of course, I mean,
I saw what you were saying when I blocked out the hair with my fingers as best I could.
Yeah,
I can see what you. It's harder to make out without that hair. It helps, but it's still of a evidently superior quality. Like, this is not good. I could see the lip, both lips, the mustache.
For your very eyes. Let's try. Can you see what I'm doing here? I'm going to capture that. And now I'm going to open image J, and I hope we'll still be able to see it. Come on.
Well, yeah, just putting the VP8s beside each other like that, I think clearly does that. Well, while you're doing that, let me just ask you on the other features, just so we're not wasting time with dead air. But okay, so vertically collimated wrapping distortions. Do you think the shadow hypothesis would successfully explain that feature?
Oh, yes, obviously, because it's not, there is no wrapping distortion. It's just, it's a straight photograph. So we don't see wrapping distortions from ordinary photographs. Why would we see a wrapping distortion on this one?
So it wouldn't explain what we have with the Shroud on that front.
We can, yeah, there is no wrapping distortion on a painting or a photograph. So there wouldn't be one. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a failure.
There's only a wrapping distortion if you assume that the image derives from a body lying down or standing up.
Okay, cool. And now about body image superficiality. How would the shadow hypothesis do on those 3 levels of superficiality, in your view?
I probably exactly the same. I don't see any reason why images should sink into the cloth. Right, can you see this? Oh. Can you see or have I got to share a different screen?
Yeah, you're still sharing the paper.
Okay, so I'm going to find
stop share.
Stop sharing that, and then slide this up here. Present, share screen. Share screen, find a new window, have a look at this. Come on, share. Oh, here we go, share. Right, now here is exactly the same photograph. Whoops, now there, do you remember the point? In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to change it onto the original colors. So there's the picture we've been looking at. Yeah.
Yep.
More or less. If I take the smoothing away, we'll probably see it almost. Oh no, we won't. We'll see it exactly as it was. So we just increase the smoothing a bit, and there's the very the bright point of the nose. But as we move it sideways, there you can see that the bright point of the nose as a peak sticking up there. Now, at the moment, our perceptions are altered by the fact that we're looking at the original painting. So if I turn it blue, now this is entirely in terms of light and shade, and I can show that of shadow, I should say. If I take the lighting off, you can see that it's a uniform blue color. Everything about this is blue. The lighting is uniform, so you can't see anything. So everything I add to it is in terms of relief. And that's, I think, what the VP8 image analyzer does. And I think this is quite good. It's much better than the picture in John Jackson's, his version of it. You know, you in order to see whether there's a 3D image or not, you've got to have the opportunity to manipulate it to its best. If you manipulate the shroud image, as I'm manipulating this one, you can make it look good or bad according to what the best version is. But I think that's pretty good. Let's see the upper lip better. And again,
yeah, I definitely see the lips better. Yeah. The eyes are bulging out and stuff, and the nose is no longer on an angle. So that I don't understand. That it should still be going up and to the left.
It's much smoother than the shroud nose.
No, but I mean the tip of the nose.
Yeah, well, it sticks out. We go it like that. See that little point there?
Yeah.
That's where the artist did a white spot, and he didn't blend it into the darker ridge of the nose.
I get it, but in John Jackson paper, it looks like. Are you sure you didn't manipulate that? Because it was on a angle to the left a little bit. Looked like.
Well, I can easily make it. I can easily make it look dreadful, as indeed, you know, anybody could. Try and find a way of.
Well, that's what, like John Jackson's. This is just the unmanipulated images. And
no, you can't. It's not. There we go. If I make it go like that, so minimum smoothing. Well, now you can hardly see anything at all. But I can do exactly the same with the shroud. You take any image and you manipulate it using the parameters that you've got to appear as good as it can get. And that, I reckon, is what the VP8 could have done with that image.
Okay, but I think it's got to be consistent. So if I remember everything was consistent in terms of what they used with the shroud, the VP8 unmanipulated image, and those other images. So it has to be consistent to have a proper comparison test. And yeah, when you showed that,
no, it doesn't. I think it's quite important that it isn't. The shroud image, the settings on the 3D envisager, making it perfect for the shroud, are deliberately set so that they make it perfect for the shroud. So they wouldn't necessarily be good for any other kind of image. Similarly, if I get the artist's image and make them as good as they can be, and then put the shroud on it, you can say that the shroud is not very good. So any particular image has got to be adjusted so that its 3D qualities are seen at its best.
Okay, I tell you what. Did you see
the shroud completely destroys the view of the shroud completely? You cannot see it at all unless you remove the weave by smoothing out the image.
Okay. Okay, cool. So maybe make some from photos comparisons kind of thing where, okay, ideal for the shroud versus that, and then things that are ideal for that versus how does the shroud come out looking under the ideal conditions for these photos. And I can post, again, we don't have time to do that live, but I'll post it up on my blog for people. Oh, okay.
No.
Okay, so
I haven't got it so far. Yeah,
you don't have to do it now, like unless it'll take 2 seconds. But
I think I did it with extracting the image from the noise. I might be able to do it. Hang on a second. Up.
Okay.
Let me get it up.
I don't want to.
It's on my blog. Yeah, talk amongst yourselves. You don't like doing that. Hang on.
see, this is where we having more people on the panel would help. I could ask that. So in terms of, while you're bringing that up, then superficiality, you think it would be a check on all three levels. The top 2 to 3 fibrils would be colored, and only the primary cell wall would be affected, I guess, in the reverse thing. Okay. Blood stains, obviously it's kind of the same as the Proto-Photo. These were added. No, obviously in terms of no body images under the blood stains, both the Proto-Photo and this method, it would fail on that front if the body images, okay, so you're sharing something. If the body images were created first and then the blood stains painted on top of them, we would still have the image color underneath because they were created by the UV radiation and or from the lack thereof in the case of the shadow hypothesis. So if that's a fact, it would fail. And this is basically akin to once you get the shadow thing, you just paint the blood stains on. So, okay. So go ahead and talk.
Well, this is the Mark Rivera image. Mm-hmm. And which is particularly good because I think it's one of the best, in my opinion, because however he achieved it, what he did was he managed to extract the image from the background. And what I like to do is to check whether that's true or not. And the way you can find out whether that's true or not is by taking the image and putting this image on top of this image. Now, if it's absolutely perfect, the darks on this image will balance the lights on this image so that the image itself will completely disappear. And here is me doing it, sliding that one on the top of this one. And here, beautifully, I think, the image has vanished. Everything else is there. The blood, the creases, the lining, and so on. And so we've got, in Mark's effect, the 3D effect is much better than it is on the ordinary image. Now, this is the ordinary image, and you can see that it looks all spiky and needly because what we can see is all the different textures of the threads getting in the way. This line across the middle here is the bottom crease. These horns here, which some people used to think were Jesus wearing the devil's horn, this is the water stain. That's all visible there. And this is what you get if you look at the actual shroud. Only by removing all that do we get something. Now, these two are manipulated in exactly the same way. So they've both got maximum resolution and minimum smoothing using image J. With the result that this is a very good picture, but this one isn't. And so you have to adjust them. This is, like I said before, where there's no light shining. If there's no light shining on a monochrome image, then you won't be able to distinguish any features. It's of necessity completely gray. As soon as you add light to it, you start being able to see things. And these people here are uniformly colored. They're both popes. And the reason we can see anything, and they're not just white blurs, is because of the shadows caused by the relief. And that's what we see using this one. So we're looking here only at the relief image. And what we notice is the rather curious shape of the nose, which bounces up and down in a very peculiar way, and the extraordinary point of the lower lip, which I think I've pulled out. Oh, not a perfect three-dimensional image of a face, of course. That's what it looks like sideways on. There's the nose. Now, it's not as pointed at one end and then smooth all the way like the artist's was, but it's by no means a good example of a human nose. And then here is the lip. Can you see the lower lip, which is remarkably pointed? Yeah. So in many ways, the shroud image has its own inconsistencies. These, we're told, are perfectly circular bubble buttons or something. Well, they're nothing like that at all. And here's another version of it from the sideways on. Oh, this is looking at bruises. You see this big bump here, which is supposed to be a bruise, or maybe this one here is supposed to be a bruise, which they come out rather well in this version. But obviously they demonstrate that the shroud is not a negative, because a photographic negative, because if the shroud was a photographic negative, then the bruises would have come out light on the photo when in fact they're dark.
Okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
No, I go on to look at other things. So
Okay.
I didn't expect that. Yeah.
Okay, so I was just looking at my notes because the last thing we were talking about superficiality. But yeah, the only note that I have in terms of the shadow hypothesis is actually regarding it would fail the double superficiality aspect, which is not an established minimal relevant feature.
Yeah.
But I wrote that it can't account for that because, quote unquote, his method would require sun bleaching of the back of the cloth in order to remove color from the threads and fibers through the depth of the cloth to finally leave a superficial image on the front. And then he would have to do.
I'm not convinced about the double superficiality at all.
Yeah, neither am I. Well, it's not a minimal relevant feature. There are even Pro-Shroud guys that kind of question it.
If there is any double superficiality, it's in exactly the same way as the blood, that a slightly darker pigment has seeped its way through and arrived on the other side, same way the blood has.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So
one of the things just on the feature of that, in the 1973 investigation, they pulled out some threads that were covered in blood, and somebody noticed, and I think I'll put this in my next blog thing. Somebody noticed that the blood doesn't seep into the threads. It goes around the outside of them, but the inside of the thread is clear. So even something as runny as blood doesn't penetrate the threads. So I think something as viscous as an ink or something like that, there's no reason why it should penetrate the threads at all.
Okay, but it does penetrate. It goes beyond the 2 to 3.
It goes through and in between the threads. Yes. Obviously, because it turns up on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so the thread level stuff, but yeah, you're talking about maybe on the primary cell wall. I don't know if they examine.
I think the primary cell wall and the thread superficiality are spurious. I don't think that, I wouldn't expect any coloring agent to go through the primary cell wall unless it actually reacted with it. I mean, obviously you can stain a thing with a chemical reaction, or you can degrade it, such as by using heat or radiation. But there's no reason why a pigment should go into it. That's biologically meaningless to me.
Okay. Yeah, well, I know, yeah, obviously most Pro-Shroud guys say that it would penetrate beyond that.
They must stop saying it would. What they have to do is, if it's something as simple as that, get some paint, slosh it on some cloth. Anybody can do it, and then have a look at it. And you'll find that it doesn't. Gotcha.
Okay, so I think that covers it in terms of the Proto-Photo and Shroud shadow hypothesis. Yeah. We have one question from the audience, but just as a closing word, is there anything about these two mechanisms that we missed, that or criticisms that we should be aware of that we didn't cover?
Well, no, I don't think so. Except, as I say, and I think it's really worth emphasizing that the better, the more possible it was to be done, the more reason there was for it to be copied. I'm not a great believer in a secret inventor inventing something which is likely to be amazingly interesting and possible, and then keeping it a secret so that nobody found out about it. There are a few instances of whole civilizations being wiped out, and then you find something perhaps made by the Aztecs, and we don't know how they made it because they didn't have an opportunity to pass it on. It was totally destroyed. and the entire, perhaps the entire civilization was lost. But if you've got one person who discovers something, no, he lets everybody know about it.
And I think that's especially the case given what you said. Look, historically, this Shroud skeptical notion of a medieval genius working in his attic by himself, coming up with this, I've discovered the Shroud. That's not how artists worked back then. They were craftsmen or artisans that had teams of people. They were like companies type thing that they were hired to do a task. So it wouldn't be the case historically that just one person would discover the Shroud through this proto-photo method or this shadow hypothesis, and then they died out and took their secrets with them. No, they'd have a whole team of people.
Well, if it worked with a Shroud, the next thing you do it is with the bishop or the pope or the king, or it would be amazing.
Okay, all right, cool. So here is the audience, and this is from a Shroud skeptic, Richard Hunter. Question for Hugh. To what extent is the 3D image obtained using software from the Rivera image an accurate recovery of the bas-relief that he believes the Shroud was created from? So this is kind of related to your image forming mechanism.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's probably a very good recovery.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
There we go.
For want of further investigation, I'm really impressed by it. I like it.
All right, cool. So there you go, Richard. Hopefully that helped. And yeah, I think that's it for today's show. So thank you so much for joining me. I think it was a nice, thorough investigation. Sometimes you agreed with me. Sometimes you had some points you disagreed.
Yeah. I think we looked at...
And that was great. It was great too. I like that you kind of steel-manned. And I have to confess, as on the Pro-Shroud side, I did just dismiss the Leonardo da Vinci thing as ridiculous without even looking into it. So I'm glad that you kind of steel-manned them a bit, even while still disagreeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, the book was published in my copy, 1994.
Yeah.
How is it?
95.
How is it that not a single Shroud researcher has read it? How about that?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I'm sure there have, but
put out the challenge. If there's anybody who's actually read the Picknett and Prince book, mention it in the comment and say, yes, I have. And I realized that they didn't suppose that Leonardo was born at the same time as the Shroud was first exhibited.
Gotcha. Okay.
To be brave. There's a challenge for them.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I knew they didn't claim that, but I confess I didn't read their book, so shame on me for that. But anyways, thank you so much for joining me, and have a great week. Next week, I will be on the Reason and Theology podcast. So I was on their show talking about the Shroud of Turin last time, and this time they want to ask me about my apologetic method in general. So we're going to be talking about arguments for God's existence. Outside of the Shroud, why else am I a Christian? The historical evidence for the resurrection, my vindication prediction argument. So basically everything in one. So look forward to that. But other than that, have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Cheers then.
All right. I've hit the red